Hello and welcome to this video on moss and your bonsai. If you've ever been to a bonsai exhibition, you will see that moss is surprisingly prevalent. Not every tree has it, nor does every tree need it. Those that do use moss to great effect. The important takeaway from this is not that moss is used, but where it is used, how it is used, and, rather more importantly, how not to use moss with your bonsai. Look at this tree. It is a great example of moss done well. It accentuates the tree and makes it look older than it is. It adds to the illusion of age. It does not detract from the tree or affect its health. To do this, the owner had to account for a range of effects moss has on the bonsai. First, does it suit the tree and complement it? Second, is it the right moss? Third and finally, has it been placed around the tree properly so as to allow water to pass through? Not all trees need or even should be matched with moss. It just looks wrong. Quite often, these are single, small trees or trees in a forest that are still very immature. In other cases, it is a tree suited for a winter, bare tree display. A final example would be a tree with a very large, pronounced floral display. This is by no means a binding set of comparisons or trees that should or should not have moss, but is an idea. In comparison to the trees that should not have moss, there are trees that should. Large, solid, established trees. Definitely those on the larger end of the bonsai spectrum. Moss given with these trees increases our perception of age. Trees that are designed to look like they've been through more wear and tear, lots of gin and shari in the right places, should have moss. This gives the perception that the tree is more ancient than it really is. It is the right moss in the right place when it is needed. You might think, what is the right moss? It's all the same, isn't it? The reality is not all moss is the same, and some can be very deleterious to your trees. Some moss grows on living trees, and this can hurt the tree. In other cases, it will grow only on soil, but not your tree. These two broad distinctions just begin to guide your choice. There are varieties of moss that more broadly resemble grass or similar ideal appearances that will accentuate your tree. Others have fruiting bodies that grow out and simply look out of sorts. When we look at the two kinds of moss that you'll most frequently see, those growing on a tree and those growing on the soil, you need to use them in the right way and right place. You can't simply transplant it from one to the other. This means the moss you find growing on the ground, such as on concrete or bricks, is quite useful. It won't compete for soil nutrition, but will grow on the soil itself. This means that you can use it to accentuate the tree, but not harm the tree in any way. In other cases, moss that grows on a tree itself will often grow on deadwood. This means you need to have gin or shari on your tree for it to attach to. In other cases, it may grow on the tree, but it will compete with the tree. This affects the health, and you need to choose a type of moss that is going to be suitable for the application you are applying it to, and the kind of tree that you are using it on. If that wasn't enough of an issue when it comes to the use of moss on your bonsai, we need to consider the final application or problem, so to speak. Where you are placing your moss. This can be as much of a problem, if not the biggest problem. Simply covering your entire pot and tree soil surface in moss is wrong. Can actually be quite harmful to your tree's well-being. This is because moss can create a watertight barrier. If you cover the entire surface of your bonsai with moss, you cannot effectively water it as water will not penetrate the soil, the tree will become dehydrated and eventually die. Alternatively, you may try to put too much water there and wind up drowning your tree. The water repelling effect of moss can both be used and mitigated by better resembling nature with areas of gravel and other areas with moss. This will allow water and moisture to seep through and into the soil where moss is absent. But it also lets you keep moss in other areas, and this moss performs an important function. That area where moss is present will retain moisture. The moss will prevent the moisture from traveling out above the soil and being carried away. It acts as a sort of ground cover. This is one of the benefits and problems with moss. When you're putting it over your pot surface, you need to break it up in places. This, as said, more accurately reflects nature, but it also allows you to water the tree effectively. This very simple, broad summary of moss gives you an idea of how to use it and how not to use it, and it takes time, both work and growth, to figure out just where you want to put it and how. Your choice of which particular variety of moss will often be dictated by several things: the availability in your area to start with, but also what is growing in your trees in the area. Going out to a local forest is a good way to get an idea as to what moss you should and should not be using. Look for healthy trees and moss growing around there, versus moss growing around trees that are looking sickly and unwell. Overall, using moss can have a very good effect, but it needs to be used judiciously, effectively, and in the right way. Thank you for watching this video. If you have found it interesting, consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Please post any comments, questions, or suggestions you have below.